Most people think death is the harshest punishment the system can hand down. But what if the real punishment isn't dying at all? What if it's waking up every single day knowing there's no exit, no review, and no moment where it ever ends? At just 15 years old, Kip Kinkel avoided execution, but what replaced it may have been far worse. A sentence designed not to end his life, but to stretch it out until the very last breath. And once you understand how that happened, the question stops being what he did, and becomes whether living like this is actually worse than death. At the time, the law didn't see Kip Kinkel as a kid once the charges were filed. In Oregon, certain crimes erased age instantly. Multiple lives lost meant juvenile court was no longer an option. Childhood protections vanished the moment prosecutors stepped in. From that point on, the system wasn't asking how old he was. It was asking what had been done. And once he was charged as an adult, the consequences changed completely. Life without parole was suddenly legal. Permanent confinement was on the table. Not a sentence with reviews. Not something that softened with time. A punishment designed to never be reconsidered. This wasn't a loophole or a mistake. It was written into the law. And once that door closed, there was no process meant to reopen it. What looked like a legal technicality would end up deciding the shape of the rest of his life. But avoiding the death penalty didn't mean the system showed mercy. Kip Kinkel never took the case to trial. Instead, he made a decision that changed how the punishment would be delivered. By pleading guilty, he removed execution from the equation entirely. But what replaced it wasn't lighter. It was longer. The plea closed the courtroom fast, but it opened something far worse. A sentence with no finish line. Nearly 112 years without parole wasn't symbolic, it was calculated. Long enough to outlast any human lifespan. No appeal built into the future. No moment where behavior could shift the outcome. Confession didn't shorten the pain here. It stretched it out. Death would have ended everything at once. This sentence made sure nothing ever ended at all. But the violence that led to this outcome didn't begin in public. The first violence didn't happen in a crowded hallway or under flashing lights. It happened in a quiet house, behind closed doors, where nothing forced a rush. The weapons were already there. The setting was familiar. And what followed wasn't chaos. It was controlled. Afterward, there was no frantic escape, no call for help, no panic spilling into the street. The lights went out. The bodies were covered. Notes were left behind, filled with guilt and self-hatred. Then he stayed. He slept in the house. Under the same roof. That detail matters because it shows time wasn't taken away from him. He had it, and he used it. The night didn't collapse into regret or confession. It held steady. The violence paused, not because it was over, but because the next step required preparation. And by morning, that next step was already waiting. By morning, the violence didn't stop. It escalated. Kip Kinkel left the house armed, not reacting, but continuing. He carried multiple weapons, extra magazines, and homemade devices that were meant to cause even more damage. This wasn't an impulsive move. It was an expansion of the plan. He walked into his high school and headed straight for the cafeteria, a place chosen for one reason: people would be there. When the shooting started, it moved fast. 2 students were killed. Dozens more were injured in seconds of chaos. Panic tore through the room. But the ending didn't go the way he expected. There was no final confrontation with police. No dramatic last stand. Instead, students rushed him. They tackled him. They restrained him. The attack was stopped by the very people it targeted. And against his expectations, he survived. And that survival changed everything. Almost immediately, the question shifted from what happened to why. Was Kip Kinkel sick, or was he fully responsible? Psychiatrists didn't disagree about the diagnosis. He had a severe mental illness, marked by distorted thinking and voices that blurred reality. Medication had been prescribed long before the crimes. The warning signs were there. None of that was denied. But the law wasn't asking whether he was struggling. It was asking whether he understood. And evaluators said he did. He knew what he was doing. He knew it was wrong. He understood the consequences. That single conclusion outweighed everything else. Mental illness became context, not a shield. The court acknowledged it, then set it aside. Treatment would exist, but only inside a cell. Responsibility came first. And once that judgment was entered, there was no legal space left for mercy disguised as care. And with that decision, prison stopped being temporary. Kip Kinkel entered prison young, but nothing about his confinement reflected that. From the start, he was placed in protective custody. Not as a privilege, but as a precaution. His crimes followed him inside, and his name arrived before he did. Protective custody meant separation, limited contact, controlled movement, time spent alone by design. He wasn't absorbed into the general population, he was managed around it. Every interaction was monitored, every routine carefully restricted. The goal wasn't rehabilitation, it was containment. Even when he was transferred to an adult facility, the message stayed the same. This wasn't a phase or a stepping stone. This was where life would happen, and where it would end. Protection didn't mean safety, it meant distance, from other inmates, from normal social life, and from any version of a future outside those walls. And isolation was only the beginning of what life without parole really looks like. Life without parole doesn't announce itself with constant violence. It settles in quietly. Day by day, the punishment becomes routine. Kip Kinkel's life is built around repetition. Hours inside the same cell. The same walls. The same sounds. Doors opening and closing on a schedule he doesn't control. Meals arrive. Lights turn on. Lights turn off. When he leaves his cell, it isn't freedom, it's movement between supervised spaces. Every minute accounted for, every action observed. Without parole hearings or review dates, time loses its shape. Days blur into weeks. Years stop meaning progress. There's nothing to work toward, only something to endure. The system doesn't ask who he might become. It asks whether the routine holds. And when every tomorrow looks exactly like today, the pressure doesn't explode outward. It builds quietly, and eventually, that pressure had nowhere left to go but inward. When there's no exit, survival stops feeling automatic. Over the years, Kip Kinkel tried to hurt himself more than once. Not as a message, not for attention, but as a response to permanence. When every future looks identical and nothing improves with time, endurance becomes exhausting. Each attempt triggered the same response from the system. Increased monitoring, fewer personal items, more isolation, psychiatric housing. The goal was never to fix what caused the breakdown. It was to prevent the ending. Once the immediate danger passed, he was returned to the same conditions that produced it in the first place. Alive, but unchanged. These moments didn't shorten his sentence or shift his future. They only added more control. Survival became mandatory, not hopeful. Living wasn't a choice, it was an obligation enforced day after day. And when hope disappears, the system finds another way to keep things running. Over time, the system shaped Kip Kinkel into something it could manage. Not free, functional. He earned a college degree. He learned a trade. He even became certified to teach yoga. On the surface, it looks like rehabilitation. But inside a life without parole sentence, these achievements serve a different purpose. Education fills hours. Work creates structure. Routine keeps the mind from collapsing under monotony. None of it opens doors. None of it earns review. Productivity doesn't lead to freedom, it makes permanent confinement sustainable. Even mentoring other inmates wasn't about redemption. It reduced volatility. It kept order. Everything he built existed entirely inside the walls and stopped at the cell door. Progress didn't change the sentence. It only made the waiting survivable. But time didn't soften how he was seen. Time erased a lot of names inside prison. It didn't erase his. What he did followed him everywhere. The school attack. The murder of his parents. His age at the time. Inside prison, reputation doesn't fade, it hardens. He isn't judged by who he is now, but by what he did then. Guards know the name. Inmates learn it fast. And certain crimes place someone permanently at the bottom of the hierarchy, no matter how they behave afterward. That kind of recognition limits everything. Where you're housed, who you're near, how others respond before you speak. It turns every shared space into a calculation. Silence becomes strategy. Compliance becomes survival. Infamy becomes a second sentence, running alongside the first, and unlike time served, it never counts down. And even changes in the law couldn't loosen its grip. Years after the sentence was handed down, the law itself began to change. Courts across the country started questioning whether kids should ever be locked away forever. New rulings forced judges to consider youth, development, and the possibility of change before imposing permanent sentences. In many cases, doors that were once sealed were reopened. But not here. His sentence wasn't mandatory. It wasn't automatic. It was deliberate. Multiple life terms stacked together, reinforced by a plea deal that removed execution in exchange for certainty. Courts reviewed it, then upheld it, again and again. The system acknowledged the new standards, then ruled that they didn't apply. The door wasn't overlooked. It was examined carefully, and it stayed shut. And now, the future is already written. Kip Kinkel is now in his 40s, but age doesn't move this sentence forward. It only confirms it. There are no parole hearings to prepare for, no dates to circle, no moment where time served changes anything. Every year ahead will look like the ones already gone. The routine will continue. The walls won't change. The ending is already decided. This is where the question returns. Is justice defined by how a punishment ends, or by how long it lasts? Execution brings finality. Life without parole offers no release, only repetition. A person wakes up every day knowing there is no exit, no forgiveness written into the future, no finish line waiting ahead. Whether that's justice isn't something the courts are debating anymore.